Welcome to Craig's Gun Channel. This video is intended for those taking their first steps into firearms ownership, as I wanted to make some firearms basics videos to help you as you learn about your new purchase or if you're trying to decide on one. This video was a follow-up to the recent Revolver Basics video, and in that video I covered the very basics of revolvers, and today we'll go a little bit more in depth. Revolvers may seem simple, and they are in terms of being compared to a semi-auto pistol. However, they're much more complex than people generally assume. There's many things to consider when shopping for or maintaining a revolver, and most of them have to do with the heart of the gun, the cylinder itself. For a revolver to function properly, the cylinder must be indexed correctly with the barrel when the cartridge fires, and this is called timing. Properly timed cylinders allow the bullet to be correctly centered in the bore and allow it to function safely, propelling the bullet and gases out of the barrel. The cylinder is generally held in place by a small locking lug called a cylinder stop, which engages and locks the cylinder when the hammer is cocked and ready to fire. This is called the Revolvers Lock-Up. If the cylinder alignment is not maintained or the lockup not within specifications, the bullet might not be centered in the barrel's bore and can result in poor accuracy, bullet fragments being shot out of the sides of the gun, or even worse, could potentially cause the firearm to catastrophically fail. The next thing to be aware of is a revolver cylinder gap. To be able to operate, the cylinder must be able to rotate within the handgun's frame. There is a slight gap between the cylinder and the barrel which allows this rotation. However, it must be tight enough to contain the pressures needed to fire the gun. Like the timing in the lockup, this gap must be within manufacturer's specifications, which generally calls for 1 to 8 thousandths of an inch to be safe. When shopping for a revolver, keep all of this in mind. You should have no issues with a new revolver, but if you're shopping for a used one, make sure that when working the action that the cylinder indexes properly and that the cylinder locks up correctly with a correct cylinder gap. There's always a small amount of play or looseness in both the timing and the lockup, however it is important that these be within manufacturer specifications for the gun to be safe and operate properly. This brings me to something that I'm sure you've all seen in the movies or TV, the classic spin of the cylinder with that familiar clicking sound, and then flicking the wrist to close it. Usually this is being done by someone being portrayed as a weapons expert. Trust me, they're not. There's two things wrong with this. First, spinning the cylinder on a swing-out style revolver rarely makes that clicking noise. That's the sound that a single-action, gate-loading revolver makes. The second more serious issue is flicking the cylinder to close it will damage the locking cylinder stop and might even shear it off completely, resulting in a cylinder that will be out of time and might not even lock up at all. The next thing I want to discuss is cylinder gap and the effect it has on shooting styles. Most handgun experts will advocate for the 2-thumb forward combat style grip. I myself try to employ that, but it has been pointed out several times in the comments I routinely fail to properly utilize it when shooting. This is in large part to my formative years shooting where I exclusively shot revolvers. You see, with a revolver, the last type of grip you ever want to use is the 2-thumb forward combat style grip. All firearms generate tremendous pressures inside when firing. This pressure is what propels the bullet toward the target. The more powerful the gun, the more pressure it will generate. For example, the .357 Magnum generates pressures up to, and sometimes even slightly goes over, 35,000 pounds per square inch. The cylinder gap, which allows the cylinder to rotate, also allows some of those gases to blow through. This high-pressure gas is dangerous and care must be taken when shooting not to cause injury. Let me show you why. For this demonstration, I placed a sausage section on a skewer in line with the cylinder gap and approximately 4 inches away. The blast of the gases and particles of unburned powder blew it off of the skewer, and when I recovered it off the ground, you can see the damage it made to it. Of course, if you were gripping a handgun, your thumb would not be 4 inches away. So I got another sausage, and this time held the revolver cylinder less than an inch away from it. I didn't bother to pick this one up, but as you can see, the damage it could cause to potentially your thumb instead of a sausage is not something to take lightly. The final thing I want to discuss is the reality of what a revolver is and what it isn't. It is a much simpler handgun when being compared to a semi-auto pistol, and therefore considered to be more reliable in operation, and along those lines, it is easier to learn how to operate. With its sights attached directly to the fixed barrel, it generally has the capacity to be much more accurate than a semi-auto pistol. Now the other side of the equation. While they are simpler to operate and are generally more reliable, they're not foolproof. While rare, a revolver can jam, and when they do, they frequently are much more difficult to clear and get back into action. A propped primer or a shell casing that's slightly out of specification, or even powder fouling can lock a cylinder up, rendering it inoperable until corrected, which can involve fully disassembling the gun. I've had this happen myself, and I've had to work on several seized guns. While they can be more accurate, that's mostly when they're being used in single action mode. The heavy double action trigger pull, which also cocks the hammer, makes them difficult to shoot well in double action. These are things to consider when considering a revolver for purchase. Like any firearm, you must become familiar with its operation and practice with it to become proficient. This is especially true if its role is intended to be in a self-defense capacity. I hope that this information is of value, and if you like the video, I would ask that you hit the like button and subscribe if you want to continue to see more like this. I appreciate your viewership, I value your comments and feedback, and as always, until next week, stay safe.